Today we have Representative Gerald Brady. He's going to speak to us briefly about the infrastructure bill and things that are going on down in Dover and getting things passed. Welcome, Mr. Brady.
Thank you.
Representative Brady, we appreciate it. Thank you, thank you. We'd also like to thank Goobers for having us here today. It's a great diner. It's going well. Things are jumping here in the 4th District. But right now on your plate, you have the bond bill.
Yes, indeed.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, in January, under the governor's recommended budget, which we call GRB, the governor had proposed a $850 million capital budget request. It was $850 million, so this is rounded off to $1 billion. That was projected at the time. In June, actually I stand corrected, in May, the last week in May, DFAC had met, that's the Delaware Financial Advisory Council, which projects our revenue increases or decreases based on the economy. They projected that we, the state, have an $878 million surplus. So that round that off to $1 billion.
Right.
So as I said, you had the capital projection by the governor in January, yet now you have another 878 in June. And by the way, next Monday, the 18th of June, is the last DFAC meeting for this fiscal year, and we expect that will be healthy. So the bottom line is, at this point, we have a significant surplus in addition to the highest proposed capital budget that has ever been requested. So needless to say, we have, at least for the moment, sufficient funds to not just improve the demands of the infrastructure at the current moment and project it forward, but also to improve the things that we had to overlook in those very lean years from 2008 until 2015, and in the, I should say 2018, and in those budget years we were, even nationally, we were in a recession.
Right.
So we had to cut each year on programs or projects, and primarily those projects were deferred maintenance. So therefore, much of the infrastructure was not being maintained, sadly, to its fullest capacity, yet had been overlooked for such a period of time that the deterioration factor has quadrupled.
Just to clarify for the viewers, so when we're talking about maintenance, these are on state facilities.
Correct, that's
Okay.
correct. State facilities and state responsibilities,
Okay.
i.e. infrastructure, roadways, bridges are the big thing, and sewers and things of that nature. We haven't been able to maintain them, nor have we been able to implement newer structures based on the ever-changing environmental factors.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost $400 million for the roads within our state.
That's correct. That's correct. And our roads have been, as I said, for reasons that were dictated far beyond even the state's obligation. We just could not keep up with the roads, while at the same time our capacity was increasing. Our population, particularly in the southern Sussex County region and parts of Kent County, where we have to put in new roads, we have to they compete with the infrastructure in Newcastle County, which in many times is improving the old roads. And one of the best examples is the 141 corridor from basically Newcastle over to Greenville.
It seems like it's never ended.
Exactly.
I mean, it's been working on it for I don't know how many years now, that 141 interchange, but
Yes.
hopefully there'll be an end. Right?
And it's often been said, in some cases it's true, is by the time when the project begins until its completion, the lifespan has in some cases already, in other words, the meter has already started.
Absolutely.
And in some cases the capacity has already increased. And that's why
I think that goes along with our bridges too, right? So as long
Correct.
as they're supporting weight, they're still going to have an issue with them. The clock never really ends.
correct.
So in regards to education, I noticed that's the second biggest item on the the bill, within the bill, what are some of the plans that you or the House is planning to do in regards to education?
Well, first and foremost is we have a very, very um, good team of legislators that have come from education backgrounds. We've all had education, but I mean,
Yeah.
they have worked in various capacities, either in the school districts or as teachers. So there's a wealth of knowledge there that are very familiar with the needs and the demands, not just of the curriculum and the core curriculum and the provisions for the students, but also the facilities. And in some cases, those facilities are not just outdated and antiquated, they no longer, or I should say, they need to continue to meet the capacity levels, which are accelerating. That's, for example, in Appoquinimink, which had a large population demand, while at the same time, the city of Wilmington was in decline in terms of the aged structures and things of that nature. So you had these two great demands. Let's meet the new population, but we still need to service the old population.
Right.
And the city of Wilmington is a good example where many of those facilities are well beyond 50 to 70 years old, need renovation. Not only they need renovation, in some cases, they've had to close some facilities down due to environmental threats and things like that.
One of my hopes for the infrastructure bill in regards to education, and this is just a hope, and I'm sure that it's in there, is that the technical divide with lower income families. So unfortunately, during COVID, a lot of the students had to rely directly on the internet or Zoom or whatever platform necessary in order to obtain an education. What we have found, or what the state has found, and the Department of Education has found, excuse the redundancy, is that the students were kind of left out. If they did not have the internet connections necessary in order to facilitate the classwork, they kind of were drifted away. Some of those students aren't accounted for at the moment.
Correct.
What does the bill address, or how does the bill address those needs?
Well, the bill, number one, addresses those needs directly in terms of the technology and the new classroom, so to speak, which quite frankly has no limits. I may say, as a footnote, and very proud to say this, that all three of my daughters are educators or
So
school
you
teachers.
get firsthand what's going on.
I hear it on a daily basis. They all teach in Red Clay, and therefore I get almost a daily sit rep, situation report. Yet, if I can address your question very directly, I'll refer back to my statement about how I can accentuate the knowledge and the wisdom of a number of legislators, primarily in the last election. There were a good crop of new single moms, female legislators, both in the Senate and in the House, and they brought a very, very unique perspective, but also a very strong voice and a solidified voice. So what was once, and I shouldn't say overlooked, but it didn't seem to be a priority on the legislative agenda of some of the legislators. It certainly has changed drastically within the last year and a half, and it continues to do so. So the emphasis on the individual student post-COVID and the demand for the ever-increasing technology is probably as great now as it ever has been in the General Assembly.
I can't agree with you more. The other thing is we have to ensure, and Secretary Fudge from the federal government has made it very clear that she wants to ensure that that there's equality within housing. And how does that fall under infrastructure? Well, if people can't afford to go to work and they can't afford a proper place to live, then it's an issue. Does the bill address anything in regards to equality of housing?
Yes, it does. And in fact, we've just had, matter of fact, our housing director, and Anas Benati has moved on, and I was going to say Chris Johnson, but it's not Chris. Andrew.
Andrew Young.
Yes, is the new housing director of Delaware State Housing. But prior to his departure, Anas did present to the bond bill members, a very healthy request, which I now know we can meet. to improve many of those situations, particularly workforce housing and the location of that, the workforce housing, because that's another commodity that's ever changing, is where our workforces, which traditionally would go to automobile plants or refineries. All of that is evolving to the age of fast production and fast distribution. So you see a lot of distribution centers, like in Delaware City, for example, and out along Boxwood Road. The old automobile plants are now very healthy and viable enterprises, but the workforce has changed. So
Yeah, we've turned into more of a gig economy, and people need to understand that this bill also helps them as well. So just not the manufacturing side, but all that trickles down.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and I think that it's important that people know that, and I don't believe that they do.
And the housing market is now, fortunately, is not only stabilized, but it's increasing very, very rapidly. So, there's ample workforce housing yet, and the infrastructure that's compatible with that. For example, sewers and sewer systems that are connected, sanitation as well as storm flow, which is something that I'm quite frankly very big on. It's called RC&D, Resource Conservation and Development, and that's that whole stormwater management issue that we continue to combat, because the more we expand our footprint, the more we create impervious surface, and then you get all these stormwater issues and floods and things like that. So that's critical when you're considering housing as well.
Absolutely. So I believe that the stormwater system and the septic systems that we have was given, I believe, $60 million in regards to improvement, and as well as studies. The American Society of Engineers has given Delaware a C- to a D in regards to their infrastructure.
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
Well, it's unfortunate that it has occurred. However, my commitment and the commitment of many others is just galvanized, because we not only have to make those corrections now, but ensure that we, as we expand, that we improve the quality of the infrastructure, and the capacity of the infrastructure is key. I mentioned a moment ago about sometimes we get to the end of a project to the point where its distribution or its serviceability has kind of outgrown itself in 5 years, and that's the case, and particularly in places like Middletown, Odessa, Townsend, where you had inadequate infrastructure, particularly subsurface, like the public works component, that's overlooked, because out of sight, out of mind. You don't see it. We don't know what's been improved, but we need to ensure that what we build is above and beyond the standard, quite frankly. And so, yes, that's unfortunate, yet it's an inspiration sometimes. Out of adversity comes strength.
Moving at the speed of government is a term that I like to use, right? It's never as fast as we want it to. When are we going to begin to see these capital improvements actually happening?
Well, the capital improvements are happening now. They're just happening at a much slower pace. And in some cases, the economy, I'll use, for example, Boxwood Road and 141 corridor, where we had a vacant, acres and acres of a vacant lot. The former General Motors plant, which is now a very large and very productive Amazon
fulfillment center.
Yes. So that's one of the reasons why the 141, particularly our Commons Boulevard and that entire interchange there, had to be, if you think about it, it was improved twice in the last 15 years, but it was to meet a different demand. And so sometimes we find ourselves reacting to impetus that's healthy, in this case, with the creation of jobs.
Which then brings revenue to the state.
Right, which brings revenue to the state, yet at the same time, we need to build a compatible infrastructure to maintain that serviceability. That creates a competitive atmosphere in the lean years when you're coming before the bond committee. For example, Deltec needs sidewalks or parking lots or things of that nature. So those things are deferred while we're trying to to improve and keep pace with the economy. And so that's the dilemma that a lot of the planners are faced with. And then sadly, after the planners are done with their conceptualizations, we have to find funding. And in some cases, you've got that the old expression, do we invest inside the school or outside the school?
Right.
So fortunately, we have a very significant surplus to address that. But I will say one other thing before we go any further. It would definitely be at my disadvantage if I didn't mention this. The governor has been very emphatic about what we used to call budget smoothing, which is a strategic, it's saved for a rainy day. This is in addition to the rainy day fund and the 2% that we're required to set aside each year. The governor several years ago had, through executive order, had created a strategic resiliency fund. He put money in reserve.
The rainy day fund.
Well, there's two. It's another rainy day.
Another
fund.
rainy day fund. Okay.
Yeah. Because we had a surplus. This was prior to COVID. Thank God we had $149 million in surplus while we went into COVID. And so it enabled us to get through that transition period. And quite frankly, and very interestingly, we actually came out of COVID with significant surpluses because we were saving money on operational costs, and DART buses weren't riding, schools weren't turning their electricity off, all of our facilities. And a lot of our projects were done ahead of time because there was no traffic on the road. So it would be wise, and I don't know the final number, but the governor does plan to put some of this $878 million surplus into a reserve so that this time next year and thereafter, we will have money to continue that momentum of trying to stay ahead of the problem as opposed to behind the problem. I should have included that in the response to your question about how do we stay ahead of it. This is one way, is not to go into each year blind, depending on that year.
So how does CARES Act funding fall within this in regards to
CARES Act funding address any deficiency or any measures that were utilized to react to and to address COVID-related deficits.
Okay.
So you could not, in many cases, use it for your operating costs of government. You could use it for some of your capital costs if it qualified for the prerequisites for CARES Act. Much of the CARES Act was spent at the local level, responding to either testing initially and then eventually the vaccine. That's where a majority of that money was to go and has gone to.
So the bill was in response, basically, we're trying to keep taxes low, right? So we're going to place that debt over a longer period of time and pay them through bonding. Right?
Yes.
How would you address the tax situation? Are you comfortable with that right now?
With the taxes?
With the taxes.
Yeah, the tax structure?
Yes.
Yes, it's very difficult. I had this discussion late last night with Rick Eisenberger, the finance director, in response to an earlier piece of legislation this year that would have increased or would have created new tax structures. And my gosh, you look around at your constituency, who's going to sponsor or who's going to feel comfortable with a tax increase during a significant surplus? It's a difficult sell. But it would behoove us to plan for the not so good day, that when we would have to increase taxes. So for the moment, yes, I'm very happy with the tax structure. Those could argue that it needs to be increased, are not necessarily wrong, but not at this time.
So with a couple minutes left, I know you have a couple things going out right now as far as bills. Is there anything that you would like to let your constituents know?
I'm actually working on a piece of legislation.
Yes.
I'm working on the continuation of the plastic bag prohibition here in Delaware. It's an environmental issue. 2 years ago, we passed it was called the single-use plastic bag, which was a very thin bag that you would get at all the supermarkets. and big box stores. That was devastating much of our infrastructure, particularly the storm waters and the collection basins and things like that. And then it had a significant impact on our landfills. So the relationship between the plastic bags and landfills is very, very direct. I mean, for this occasion right now, it would be too elaborate and probably would lose everyone's interest. But what we did was eliminated the thin bags that you would just thousands and thousands of bags each year for each person would just sit in landfills that took 500 years to degrade. Well, what happened was the stores then got thicker bags, and so it's kind of the unintended consequence occurred. So my bill now will eliminate those bags, yet at the same time, and it will take a year, at the same time we're researching for an alternative to that. You can't just close off, the society from bringing their commodities home from the supermarket to home. So it's something that I've been working on for a couple of years now, and hopefully we'll get it through this session.
Well, we're excited about that too, and that brought up to my other question. I hope that some of these funds are dealing directly with the environment and helping it, because you can't pick up a newspaper now without dealing with the environmental issues and learning about the environmental issues. So hopefully some of this bond bill will go towards that.
Yeah, it will. And if we have another minute, for years and years and years, we have the transportation commitment, the bond bill. For for over 50 years, each legislator received same incremental amount of what was called CTF, Community Transportation Funds, and that was used to improve the streets and roadways, particularly in subdivisions. We just cannot keep up. There's absolutely no way. So a number of us feel that if we reinvest that money, put it back into DELDOT, have DELDOT improve these roads on a schedule that's determined by their needs, we can not just meet the demands of the residents, but also contractually, it brings the cost down. And so that's something that Representative Lynn and Representative Oshinsky and myself have been working on for a number of years, is to put all that money into one big pool. It's called the pilot program, and have DELDOT very aggressively meet the demands of our ever deteriorating roadways, particularly in subdivisions.
Yeah, I mean, the roads are, I would say, the most popular complaint that we have, and that we
it's an easy target.
Yeah, it is, and it's something that everyone utilizes. Well, most folks utilize every single day.
Yes.
Representative Brady, I want to thank you so much for coming to join us on the agenda today. You have enlightened us on the bond bill and all other things that are going on in the state. Thank you, and we look forward to having you again.
Thank you.
On the agenda.